The Powers Project.
Does India pose a threat to China as far as in economically or anything of that nature where it's going to that China
No,
worry about them as well?
no. I mean, most of this stuff is just posturing. A lot of stuff in the Himalayas is just posturing, trying to make China feel strong, and the Chinese people. Right, it's always trying to keep the Chinese morale high. Right, a lot of stuff with Taiwan is similar. So even if they did go to war with Taiwan, it might be to sort of distract the population from internal problems, or to rouse some national fervor. It's a possibility. It's not like they wouldn't do it if they felt they needed to. But India is just, it's far away, man. Throughout, there's never been a real war between India and China.
No, I don't.
Real war throughout history. It's just too far away. The Himalayas are a major barrier. You know, that's like, yeah, it's like the Pacific, not the Pacific. It's a mean. It's you don't even fight there,
Yeah,
really.
I don't mean like a physical war. I mean like do
Oh,
economically do can they harm China in any way, like taking over manufacturing or anything like that, where they become a take a bigger part of the manufacturing away from China?
no, I think like we were saying earlier, the era of like locating all the production in the world in one place, that's probably over. It's probably going to be co-located, like we were saying. It's going to be sort of co-located where you produce things, and India doesn't have the largest consumer base, although it has one. And yeah, it's just going to be spread around. You know, Vietnam is actually a place where a lot of manufacturing has left China, so that's a major one. India just has, you know, it has good things, it has problems, but it's never going to turn into China either.
Right.
Like everyone who says India is going to be like the next China, it's like, all right, well, they didn't do it. You know, like China has all these problems, but they also managed to do this insane modernization, which is just fabulously impressive. But you know, that's never happening in India. India is more likely to see, you know, sort of wealthy coastal enclaves with production. It's never going to fully integrate all the different pieces. It's too many people. It's too disaggregated. It's kind of, you know, it's like the United States. It has, well, I don't want to say it's like the United States, but it's a federal system with many languages. It's very lucky to have English kind of unifying things. But India is, again, it's similar to China. These are the two major ancient large agricultural civilizations that we have that kind of made it on in a major way to modern day. And the big difference, I actually have an article, if anyone's interested, I have a very long 8,000 word article comparing India and China, because I think it's a very useful comparison for people to have. But a really important part is the imperial impulse in China has always been much, 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 much stronger and more successful than the Indian one. And basically by that, I mean the ability for someone somewhere to come in and bring it all together and kind of durably do that. So when that happens in China, whenever you manage to bring all the pieces together, let's just use 1949, communist China, they do all these integration measures. So they start wiping out local cultures, they wipe out local languages, they do all sorts of stuff like that. Modern China, they've created a simplified Chinese. They simplified the whole Chinese language to make it more accessible and to make it more dominant within the country. And you know, India has never been able to wipe out local cultures as successfully as China. And you know, when you get into the modern world, you know, there's a price for that, right? You're never going to see the level of hierarchical integrated purpose that you see in China. It's never going to be able to achieve those sorts of things. Maybe you don't need to, whatever it is, but the sort of country India is going to become is just much more of a regional sort of country that's, you know, we're not going to be in the era of other, like I was saying earlier, we're not going to be in the era of new global powers. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like when you really think about the United States, like even World War II, it's like this country fought a war in Europe and won, and it fought a war, although Russia really did a lot, or Soviet Union did a lot, and then it fought a war in Asia and won. And it did that at the same time, right? Meanwhile, France lost 3 times in a row to Germany. And that's like a major country, right? The United Kingdom was turned into an aircraft carrier for the United States. I mean, this is just, you know, then Germany was occupied. Japan was occupied. And Japan is the third largest country, largest economy in the world. It's like I was saying earlier, the game is up with the political world. Like we don't need to be like nerdy, you know, high school kids who love political video games. I mean, this isn't about like winning anymore. It's like, what do we do with the world we have? I mean, these are some of the deeper questions that we're kind of got to face. The way it worked in 1945 is the U.S. was willing to be the star on the team, but to give everybody, bring everybody onto the team, make everybody feel like they were a part of it, get everybody motivated in the same direction. And that worked because we had, the Soviet Union. That doesn't work anymore. And the United States is currently trying to reconfigure everything to fight China. But we realize nobody can help us. I don't think we're not going to end up in a conflict with China, but just to the point of, this is the last major competitor to the United States. And well, how is the world, coordinating against it? Well, we're just, what are the Europeans going to do? How are you going to help in any way? Right. It really is all of NATO is useless, right? That whole system is useless. It's being revealed to just be a ploy to kind of keep the Europeans from fighting each other, and which is fine. But what do you do, right? And so, do you need alliances with Japan and all these countries? I think more what you're just seeing is that, the U.S. is just, it's pulling away from a lot of these things. It's not like investing and bringing everyone together, because what are we bringing everyone together for, right? Like, you want to build a beautiful, harmonious, amazing world, but the world's getting pretty mean and difficult and nasty, and we don't have a government that's able to fix everything. Can't even fix our own shit. Can't fix homelessness in Los Angeles. What are you going to do fixing, Afghanistan? What are you going to do fixing China and preventing it from falling into pieces? What are you going to do fixing or preventing Poland, Russia, Germany, any of these countries from having problems? Russia from invading Crimea? Like, there's endless problems everywhere. And I think the U.S. is just moving back to dealing with its own issues, and that's going to mean a lot more chaos around the world. There's no other way about it. There's no other way that kind of shakes out. I mean, again, a lot of people in the United States, they say, this is all our fault. It's the giant U.S. military, all of our military bases all over the world. We cause these problems. We need to scale back the military. We need to do this. We need to do that. We need that. That's fine. I'm not here to talk about what the military size should be, but the U.S. military wasn't out there trying to pick fights with everyone. I mean, it has actually invaded like basically every country but 2 countries on Earth. But the actual reason it was there, and the reason countries allowed U.S. troops and allowed all this, is because it was actually trying to create a global system where things worked. Because what happens when the U.S. military isn't around is that people fight each other. They fight their neighbors, right? Japan and China have fought brutal wars over the years. The idea that they were developing right next to each other in total harmony and bliss, and South Korea, which was, all these countries were pummeled by Japan in World War II. The only reason this happened is because of the United States.
Right.
There's, we just accept all this as the way the world is. It's like, no, we put our foot down. That's what happened. If we take our foot off, well, it might not look that pretty, right? That's the way it goes. And there's a lot of factors that come into this. We have the global demographics. The whole world is aging. They don't have babies anymore. So we're all aging. That impacts your military, that impacts your economic growth, your technological progress, your cultural innovation. All these things start to change, and we don't know what the world's going to look like, but it's not going to look like what it was. And so what I keep telling people is, don't you think 2019 is coming back when this is all over with the pandemic? Please, like literally like 1919, okay, like 1899. Like this is more what things are looking like. If you want to look at the globe, like it's a very different world. And the U.S. government, a good thing for people to keep in mind, all this stuff I'm saying, anyone who's listening, listen to it, and like, if it seems totally stupid and weird, just ignore it. But an important thing is the U.S. government doesn't know how to deal with this, right? I'm not here to criticize any advocate or criticize any particular political figure, but Trump came in and didn't exactly know what to do about it. Be a lot of gut feelings and emotions about what could be done. Biden knows he doesn't want to do what Trump did, but doesn't have any idea what about to do about it. And they were both just winging it along the way. This is not rocket science anymore. We don't need to pretend like these guys come in with massive, beautiful, perfect plans to fix everything. Yeah. The scale of all of the problems, the complexity of the problems, the interrelatedness of all the problems, it's just getting worse. And then the quality of the people that we're putting in the government isn't getting better to match it, right? So, so it's bad. It's very bad. And we're in very, very dangerous bubbles and echo chambers and sort of distraction, sort of carnival distraction playgrounds with all of our games and our social media that we're avoiding all the stuff that's going on. So it makes us very easy to manipulate. And it also makes us very unaware of kind of where things are going. And a lot of these questions, we have to talk these out. If we want to figure this out, the way we'll see what to do, how to respond to this, is by talking about it and thinking it through, on shows and podcasts like this, because this stuff is not about to rearrange itself into a pretty simple happy new sort of picture.
Right.
And a lot of people, we're just not going to hear this, not to keep pummeling this, but our journalism has become, it's not a viable life anymore. It's not like a viable career. So the quality of it has all gone down, and, you know, effort, everything's gone down. But more importantly, all the like foreign correspondents that help us understand the world and where it is. And they've been, you know, these are smart guys. These are guys who are embedded in China for 20 years, embedded in these countries. They talked to multiple administrations. They've seen how things happen. They've seen how big government plans failed or were just hype or marketing. And it was very on the ground, real knowledge about things. That's not getting passed on to another crop, to another younger generation. It's just not. You know, these guys are just writing blogs and all that kind of stuff. So it's just, you know, to find this knowledge, to really get what's going on, we have to go elsewhere, and we can't. It's very unclear, like, kind of what to do. We don't want to be stuck thinking the world is exactly what we thought what we kind of were expecting 10 years ago, or the way it is, because it's rapidly changing. And yeah, we have to deal with it, really. Just think it through.
Right. Well, I want to make just one point about journalism. You know, it's back in the day, there was truth in journalism, and when the cable came about, and the Republicans got rid of that title or whatever it was that made it so that the news channels had to, you know, when you had ABC, NBC, CBS, and those were your only channels, basically, they were held to a standard of having to tell the truth. And so they were reporting the news as it was supposed to be. It's become nothing more than propaganda to their base. And so it's been monetized, and all these, you know, news stations or these channels, you know, that are owned by Fox or CNN or whatever, they understand that. And so now it's no longer about reporting the news. It's about reporting the narrative that their base wants to hear, and twisting that narrative until it comes out the way they want it to come out, because that's what's going to make them money. And so it's like you said, there's no foreign, you know, correspondence anymore. They don't, you know, someone's writing about China in their living room, you know, in Tuskegee, Oklahoma somewhere, and never been to China, like you, never, you know, it hasn't, and only regurgitating what they've heard from other sources. And so we don't get the most accurate story.
Yeah. You know, one thing I'd say to that too is, maybe an even better way to think about it is, there was never objectivity. Because you go back to the Walter Cronkite era, the whole right. ABC thing, that was the establishment, right? How did they report on civil rights? How did they characterize all that? How did they characterize Martin Luther King or, you know, Malcolm X, right? Or the Vietnam War? What was the way they were pushing all that? I think, you know, another way to think about it is maybe that we had a war between opinions and facts, and opinions won, because humans like opinions. We like personality. We like emotions. And that's really what it is. Because I actually don't think that the left and right let's just call it establishment media, right? For either political party, right and left. I don't even think they're as powerful as anyone thinks anymore. What we have is more of a Wild West. Random dude, like you said, random dude talking about thing he does or doesn't know about, you know, with a lot of emotion, with a lot of intensity, with a lot of passion. That's what gets people going. Like, I think part of the reason Fox and all these are successful is because they've embraced that in their style. CNN and Fox, it's just people very passionate, kind of yelling at each other, you know, slandering this thing, condemning that, criticizing this, making everyone feel part of the team. Like, it's extremely emotional. And I think it's a deeper thing about how we humans like to communicate. We don't like, I'm always amazed when I get a voice message actually from a woman, you know, an audio message on your phone, and it, like, just women in general seem to be able to communicate more emotions and tone various emotions in like a couple words, sentences, than I can do like in a 2-hour interview or anything. Like, it's very impressive. And like, it just always makes me realize how, like, there's so much emotion that we naturally put into our speech, that, you know, maybe in school, maybe when we're learning to make our paragraphs and make all these logical arguments, we try and cut it all out. We try to make it as logical as possible. But the roots of emotion are, you know, the roots of language are it's very rooted in emotion. Like, I just recently saw a baby at the beach just went from totally normal and talking and laughing to scream crying, right? Like, the transition between like normal, seemingly rational communication to just crazy outburst was insane. And I think it's a much deeper thing. So this question of journalism, I think objectivity is just gone, right? Even me, like I know objectivity. Basically, people listen to me that think, does he know what he's talking about? Maybe. Does it sound credible? Okay. Does he have any sort of background? Do people seem to think he knows what he's talking about? Like other people, that's what you do. You just kind of, you do it like that, but there's not really an objectivity, right? I mean, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we need to learn to deal with this world of multiple perspectives, multiple personalities, multiple beliefs, and you actually just throw yourself in it. Stop watching the same thing, stop listening to the same dude. Throw yourself in the fire and see what comes out. Because I love this line. When did we lose the ability to what is it, chew the meat and spit out the bones? You know what I mean?
Right.
I think there's something to that.
Well, it's funny you said that, because again, as people who've listened to my show, they know, or watch my show, they know that this whole podcast is about getting people to look at things from different perspectives. Because I truly believe that, we can all say, oh, I have my truth. But the issue with that, or the challenge with that, is if your truth only comes from one perspective, then you don't have the whole truth. You have a part of the truth. And you don't have the real truth until you're able to look at it from all different perspectives, and then you'll be able to see the truth as a whole, rather than just little bits and pieces of it. It's sort of like the whole thing, if you write a 6 on the ground and one person's on that side and another person's on this side, I say I see a 6, you say you see a 9. Neither one of us is wrong. So for us to argue over what it is ridiculous until we can look at it and go, oh, I see why you think it's a 9 now, and so, and I even tell people, like, almost every episode I go, listen, what Jason said, what I said, don't believe us, I mean, listen to what we had to say, but if check it out yourself and do your own research, look deeper into this and see if what we're saying is true, because sometimes we'll say something that may be inadvertently wrong, and and I'll be, if someone can correct me, I'm the first one to go, oh, I was wrong, and like when I just said Tuskegee, Oklahoma, when I meant to say Muskogee, Oklahoma. I know Tuskegee is not in Oklahoma, and so people will go, he's an idiot. So anyway, and so, you want to challenge those opinions, though. I don't want to accept them. I want to accept facts, or what we know to be facts. And of course, we know as time goes on, just like in science, facts can change depending on, what further information that we gather.
I think facts are also cheap now. You know what I mean? Like, to figure out, like, let's say I said all this stuff about the size of China and the size of this. Anyone could go look it up. If I'm wrong, you'd see it right away. The real thing is that there's so many facts everywhere. We don't even know how to, you go to Wikipedia. I remember like 10 years ago or something, like Wikipedia articles were like more readable. Now it's just like huge, like, I don't even know. It's like 30 minutes to read about some random, like, I want to know what limestone is made out of. And it's like 30, minutes to figure. It's like, no. But there's definitely something that these facts are just cheap. And the premium, the real meat of things is in the passion, the personality, the opinion that you put on top of it. The truth is, in all these articles, all these opinions, there's a fact in there somewhere. You like in a conservative talk show, there's a fact somewhere in there, right? There's a fact there, and it's structuring a lot of the information to talk around it. In a liberal talk show, this is the same thing. It's more that it's just facts are freely available. Like it used to be, if you wanted to figure something out, you had to go listen to Walter Cronkite. It's like, how am I supposed to know what's going on in Berlin right now? You had to go to him. Now you go on the internet, you find out right away. So I think that all these media companies are competing to be the place that you want to hear about what the facts mean. You know what I mean? Because facts don't mean anything on their own. I tell you like, oh, there's, I don't know, 50 million something in China. There's some random number, some random statistic. It's like, what does that mean? Like you need the context for it, right? If I say there's just the deserts in China are growing large, desert, all these lands and fields and stuff in China are becoming horribly toxic. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does it mean just throw some like Lysol on it and it gets better? Does it mean like what does this mean? I think that it's the depth of context that we're really missing. What I'm noticing with people of my generation, millennials and younger, is all information seems to be fragmentary. It's not even in a web. It's not in an integrated structure, right? So we have access to all these facts, but we're unable to put the facts into a cohesive, tableau, a cohesive picture, a cohesive story, a well-integrated network. Instead, it's just fragmentary event, fragmentary statistic, fragmentary situation. And it's very dangerous because it's a very disaggregated, diffuse sort of understanding of things, and very dependent. You're always dependent on the outside source, right? I think, it's a very good thing that we can access external servers to sort of download information. Oh, I want to go learn something. Just click, 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 boom. It's all in my head. But you also need to build up the servers, the databases in your own head, because you got to do that too. You got to have all that in there. So you are coming at new information with a whole body of experience and knowledge. Right. If you don't do that, like, if I read a story about China, it gets pulled into a whole system of thought about what's going on and why and where it slots in. If you just hear a story about something, you don't know much about it, it's going to overwhelm you. You can get overwhelmed by the emotions about the author is trying to stimulate in you, or the agenda of the PR company that really wrote it, or the economic motives of the consultants that are funding it to add to some company or other. There's so many different things that are taking advantage of this very weak internal sort of sense of fact, opinion, meaning, and how to integrate it all. It's making people very vulnerable.
Well, it's because you're right. It is very dangerous. It's just like a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. Well, a little bit of fact, a little bit of information, when it's taken separately, can be dangerous, because people think this is the truth now, because they go, oh, I found out this little fact, or I have this little bit of information, so this must be the truth. And without the whole picture, you don't have the truth. You might have a small sliver of the truth, but you're missing a big part of it. And you're right, that's dangerous in itself. And I think that's where we're at. Like you said, this is where we're at. And it's unfortunate. And it's one of the things I want to talk to you about with the military industrial complex. Is like, we've spent all this money and wasted so much money because, as technology comes along, as you had mentioned much earlier in the show, that they're not even updated on the technology because they're not going to eat the stuff that they already built. They're sell that crap. Even though the new technology's out there, they're going to sell it. They're not going to eat it. And so when we do things like we give Israel $7 billion a year, people don't know that $7 billion that we give them in aid goes to them buying weapons from our military industrial complex. They have to spend that money there. This extra $1 billion we're going to give them for the dome, it'll be because it'll be spent here on our military. So we're subsidizing the military industrial complex because we're not giving them enough money as it is. We've built this entire military that spends more money than the next, it was either 10 or 12 militaries combined every year. And I get why, because now we know that China's never going to be able to catch up with us. So, we're going to remain the preeminent power in the world. But, if we took half of that and said, hey, let's take care of the homeless in LA, we could do that. But we spend all this money with these companies that make money hand over fist and get rich off of this. And the taxpayers, the ones left, holding the bag.
Yeah, I think that the even deeper question with that is what should the force structure of the U.S. military look like? What is its job? Let's say we accept what's going to happen. You need to be prepared for conflict with China, but get ready. What you need to do is reconfigure the U.S. military to be based on an understanding of what the United States is, what its strategic interests are, and how it needs to interact with the rest of the world. And we should have done that after the Cold War ended, right? You had this the U.S. is, it has a military that was like, all right, let's prepare to go toe to toe against the Soviet Union all over the world, right? We probably needed a pretty big military for that, realistically. What do you do after that when that doesn't happen? Well, Russia, the amount of military you need to stop Russia from invading Europe is pretty small. It's a misnomer. the real thing is we need to ask the deeper question of just what kind of military do you need? Because the truth is, the reason the U.S. military is so much more powerful or more costly, we spend more on it than the next 12 or whatever countries combined, is because we have a large military, so they don't have to have one. Germany doesn't spend anything on its military because we don't want Germany to start having a big military. So we do all that. We don't want all these countries to be in a position where they start fighting and killing each other. Okay. So it's a bit of a misnomer of a statistic, right? Because it's like, well, what? Okay. Should we let Japan just arm up again? Do you want Korea and Japan and China all just armed to the teeth? And Taiwan? Like, I'm not trying to say what we should or shouldn't do, but Americans need to remember that perhaps we are subsidizing not just a military industrial complex, but also some semblance of global peace and stability, because you don't want the major nations of the world all duking it out, especially if they have nukes. It's not the best.
So,
but I agree with you. We could spend way more on people within the United States.
What prevents Russia and China from having to do that? Why do they not have that concern? Why do we have to be the police of the world? First it was, oh, we're spreading democracy, which was a bunch of garbage. Now it's, oh, we'll use, countries like, we'll say, well, China's, their humanitarian, I'm sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? They're inhumane.
Human rights abuses.
What's that?
Human rights abuses.
That's human rights abuses, for instance, but we'll ignore what Saudi Arabia does and play ball. Play ball with us. But we'll use those excuses to go to war or to start a war and say, oh, well, our presence is needed here because of this or because of that, which is almost always made up, almost always. And so, because here's the thing, as long as we're playing policemen of the world, that military industrial complex keeps getting richer and richer and richer. Those companies keep making hand over fist. The politicians that are invested in those companies know it. And the rich keep getting richer because of that. It's just like there's a never ending game to that. They're not going to ask, what does the military, what should it look like now? Because they don't want it. They don't want to sit back and go, oh, we don't need this.
That's the truth right there. If you actually did a major reconceptualization of what the U.S. military should look like, what it should be structured to do, that would so derail so much current planning, corporate planning, Pentagon planning. It's not something anybody's going to advocate. But what the U.S. did after 1945 was build a giant global system. Right. This is what we need to keep in mind. The U.S. built a global system, and often what it's trying to do, whether foolishly, incompetently, clumsily, whatever, is often just trying to preserve in some way the integrity of that system. So each individual little event is often stupid and a failure, whether that's, say Syria, Libya, Lebanon. You could just go really on and on all around the world. But the idea is to keep the system running. So let's say you didn't protect Saudi Arabia. Let's say you didn't work with Saudi Arabia at all, and you just all the oil exports in Saudi Arabia shut off. Well, that means there's massive energy shortages all across Europe and Asia, and there's probably wars in the Middle East, and there's probably wars like immediately, is what I mean. There's the key thing to keep in mind is always is the word is just strategic, right? This is the thing where you go to bed with people you don't like, and unfortunately in the world, just the way the industrialized world works, some of the key resources in the world are controlled by people that nobody likes, but they have to deal with. The prime, suspect among these is just, the UAE, not the UAE, but, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, all the Gulf states, all the Arab and Middle Eastern oil. There's just no way around that, especially before there was fracking in the United States. There was no way around that for the United States either. But we live in a world where the United States can be independent of foreign oil and foreign energy supplies. So the U.S. could say, hey, why don't you guys deal with this? But the real question is, well, what does that look like? That's brutal, right? That ends up being a really violent situation, because the truth is most militaries on earth, especially because last 75 years, militaries across the world outside of Russia and China have atrophied terribly, horribly. They're all just declined. Because again, for most countries, they're like, hey, why should we pay for a military if We don't have any threats anymore. The U.S. will come to our aid, and we could spend more on our economy and our people. Let's do that. Right? That's a good thing until maybe the U.S. pulls back and you're just shit out of luck, right? Your whole world was dependent on this foreign country, whether you knew it or not, whether you acknowledged it or not, whether you paid for it or not, whether you thought about it or not. That's kind of the way it works. And so I think a lot of what animates Trump, and originally Trump and a lot of people on the right who were responsive to this idea, it is a fact that this whole system, this global system, doesn't work without the United States. It wouldn't work. If you allowed all these conflicts to actually erupt, nobody would be able to coordinate or cooperate. And I don't agree with, that the United States everyone should sort of pay protection money, like kind of like a mafia situation, like everyone pays for it. But the U.S. political class never properly explained to the American people what exactly we were doing, why we were doing it, right, and what we were really paying for. Maybe after 2 genocidal wars, the political class in 1940s America said, hey, you know what? Why don't we use some of our wealth and power to try and stabilize some of this crazy planet we live on? That's a lot of what happened, and prevent the Soviet Union from sort of returning us all to terrible, right, communist darkness, Stalinist darkness, or whatever. It's a major thing. I mean, this is one of those things. It's very often it's a different perspective, like you were saying earlier. There's a very different perspective. I'm not even saying I advocate for this or that, but we have to realize how different the world looks when you're not looking out at it from a superpower, a continent away from everything. When you have huge flows of, migrants coming from war-torn nations in North Africa and the Middle East, just flowing into your country, into your neighboring countries. This is a very different world. I mean, it really, again, people can hate on Mexico and Central American countries, but it is not as bad as Europe, or it's not as bad as what could happen in China. This is a very different and very privileged, to use a very overused word, a very privileged place the United States has. And what do you do with the privilege, right? That's always the question people are asking.
I guess for me, I don't look at it as paid protection, simply because in the mafia, you're paying from the to keep the mafia from destroying your place, and here you're preventing Russia from coming in. And so it benefits Germany and France and England and the rest of them, Finland in particular. I mean, it benefits them that our presence is there, because we keep the bad guy from coming in and taking over. So why wouldn't they pay? That's my thing.
But people are ambivalent. You know what I mean? Like, let's say I was we went to the same high school. Let's say we went to the same high school and I was the absolute superstar jock athlete dude with flowing golden hair, super square jaw, just an absolute, godlike physique, right? This whole thing, I walked around, I was super popular, I was everything. And we were friends. And you were a normal guy or whatever. We were just normal guy. It's like, in these relationships, there's always a sense of ambivalence. Like, I like my friend because he's really cool and we have fun. And he likes me and I feel good. But then there's also like, he's got everything. Like, what's this? This sucks. Like, a lot of these emotions, like interpersonally, they can be very ambivalent. Like your best friend, you can like really love and then despise, the next moment. I think human emotions are very volatile in this way, and it works for countries too. A very proud country like France does not want to admit that the United States is the absolute preeminent top dog, and France is a relatively small in comparison European power. It doesn't compute. And I think that we have 8 brains. We're very conscious of status and hierarchy. And there's something very weird going on in the world where if you have a political hierarchy that is essentially static now, this era of everyone moving up and fighting and striving is over. The populations are all aging. The mass cultural political psychology of different countries is shifting. Like, what do you do if you don't feel like you can move up in the world? Like, there's just this the eternal godlike sort of jock superstar is just going to be there forever. How do you respond to that kind of stuff? I know maybe my example wasn't too good, but it's very ambivalent. Trump was trying to play hardball with the Europeans on NATO funding, trying to get them to chip in more and all this. But the truth is, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want the U.S. to pay for all the security and they want to use the money they save to invest to make their products and services even more competitive than American ones, which have to pay these security costs. That's fine. I mean, that's what I would do. Like if I had a situation like that, you would do the same thing. We would all do the same thing.
Here's the thing. The thing is like, if you're my friend, I'm not going to take advantage of you. I'm not going to say, hey, since you're hanging around me, hey, why don't you pay me like X amount of dollars every week for hanging around me when you're doing me the favor. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not, and being someone who's not jealous, it never even crossed my mind, but you make perfect sense when you talk about, you're the superpower, and then you've got, a country like France who doesn't want to admit it, which is why they always make fun of our French because they're jealous, I guess. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. It just seems like at some point you quit taking advantage of the Americans just because you can. And if you're truly an ally and truly a friend, you go, yeah, we've milked this cow for way too long. It's time for us to start, pulling our own weight. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think my example might have made it a little tougher just because I brought up friendship. But the truth is, countries aren't really, there's no friends
right
between countries. This is the truth. This is nonsense talk that we've just been spewing. Oh, our friend and ally. And we say that to every country that comes. Canada is our ally. France is our ally. Chile is our ally. Argentina is our ally. Like Zambia, you know what I mean?
All of them.
Yeah, we're just like, and the truth is the United States did try and grab the whole world, pull it together, coordinated against the Soviet Union. So that was rhetoric that came from that era in a lot of ways. But now the truth is, if the US is self-sufficient in all these ways, who's our enemy? Who's our allies? This is the real question. If we're not out here trying to protect the whole world, you guys, it's too chaotic. No one's grateful. No one's thankful. We seem to be failing. Everyone hates on us all the time. All right, we'll stop. Well, then who of any of you is our ally? This is a real question. Like, is Germany our ally? They seem to be making really good cars that seem to be pummeling a lot of the, some of the industrial base in, center of the country. You are our ally. Japan, it was doing all sorts of things to depress its currency and be really good in a lot of consumer electronics, like seems to hurt other parts of the country. Like you can make all these arguments. You can never have a full economic answer to this. If you do well in some area and we do well in another, it's like, you can always say there's a benefit to everyone, but it's much deeper. It's usually like a strategic political sort of question. It's like, well, are we aligned in some way? Like, are we aiming towards the same goal? Are we aiming against the same person? Like the big challenge Europe has right now is the United States is trying to coordinate people against China. And the only one who's playing ball is basically the United Kingdom, because they're another sort of maritime country and they have, they're very useful to the United States in a lot of ways, and they're very integrated. Actually, the only major manufacturers left in the UK are basically part of the defense sector, right? There's a couple, they make engines, they make ships, they make a couple of systems for the United States. Like BAE is basically the large British sort of defense conglomerate, and it makes most of its revenue in the United States. It's basically an American company in terms of where its products are sold, because again, like we're the one with the military. So, those are going to align. The United Kingdom is going to align with the United States. That stuff works. But a lot of other countries, all the stuff what they're going to find is, when they basically, for decades and decades, the U.S. didn't say anything about it. It was willing to sort of just keep the peace. We're not going to start a fuss. Yes, the Canadians are taking a little bit here, and the French here, and the Italians here. We were like, all right, but we don't want to cause a fuss with everybody. Trump was a really great example of how that's kind of out the window. The U.S. is willing to slap tariffs on anyone for everything, and this and that. And that's kind of why I was sort of wishy-washy on the tariffs. It's like, well, you could tariff anything. You know what I mean? You could really just start doing this to anything, and it doesn't lead really anywhere great. The deeper question is like, well, are our countries aligned? Why are we doing business, right? Should everyone do business with everyone else? If you have a purely economic answer, it's like, of course, because everyone's, the boat rises for everyone, right? It's like, yeah, I guess, but some people are getting way richer than others. Maybe you're upset about that. There's all sorts of things that get into it, but I think it's a really important sort of point that who's really our ally? It's not all of NATO. What does that even mean? NATO's there to fight Russia, basically the Soviet, not Russia. It's like, maybe Russia intact, maybe fighting Russia isn't in our best interest, right? Maybe having an intact Russia where 14,000 nukes or whatever aren't just floating around terrorist groups or random, regional warlords. Maybe that's in our interest. It just depends. We need a much more nuanced and sort of textured look at these things, because we tend to just have a list of countries in our head that are either in green or red or black, like, green, great, ally or whatever, or green or blue or whatever. And then you have red, it's like potential enemy. Black is like, terrorist threat, whatever. It's like, we don't have, it's super primitive, basically. Unfortunately, it's strategic. It's going to be, especially when money gets tighter and as the world we move into the 2020s, this is going to be about kind of cold, hard, rational calculus about how we can, get deals, how we can negotiate to get some stuff done that we both want. And the truth is that a lot of these countries are going to have to give the United States something and not the other way around.
Right. And
as ridiculous as that is. And Trump eyed this, like he saw that this is he intuited where this was the world is going. But obviously the methods weren't exactly successful by any stretch.
Yeah, well, that's because he was his own worst enemy. But the truth is like, that's one of the things I consider myself, and I am on the left without a doubt. And I was upset with the left because it's like, okay, so he's trying to do something for his country, but you're trying to twist this narrative again to make him look like he's being unreasonable and poor NATO, and it just, we need to stop with the BS. We need to stop, because they're both vying for power and for money, and they're pulling out all the stops. They're lying out their ass. They're doing whatever it takes to get to gain more power, to gain the advantage. And they're not, they don't give a damn about the American people, what it means to us. That's why I tell people both sides are they don't give
or thought.
And so it's so nice to talk to somebody who understands all this.
Well, I just, the thing I keep telling people is right now, our political system is going through a massive, torturous sort of realignment, shifting of all the coalitions within the parties. And there's no one really interesting who agrees, or who's not even interesting. There's no one who's really thought about anything that should agree down the line with every position on the left or the right. And what we should all be doing is grabbing what seems right from left, from right, from whatever, and making something that is our own thought, that is our own thinking on things, and try and hash out with people what's going on, because that's all that's happening. None of these current systems, neither the current conservative platform or the liberal, the truth is just Trump just nuked the entire basic conservative platform, right? It's already transforming. We don't even know what it means. It's kind of in flux. And the same thing's actually happening on the left, although it's a little less visible. So the truth is that we're reconfiguring what these parties mean, both the ideas, the political leaders, as these dudes finally age out, and then the actual, the actual coalition, the actual people on the ground. So the idea is the people in the government, and then the people on the ground, the actual, members of the parties and people who vote for them and the voters. So it's not a time to be wedded to some random political ideology. It just doesn't even make any sense. And I mean, even for the left too, specifically, the major social and political theories of the 20th century are not going to save us in the 21st. Socialism, communism, even the social welfare state, like these ideas, all their best days are behind them, if that makes sense. The social welfare state is a little added that a little bit, that's a little different, but we need new ideas. This is what's happening. The world is massively going to change. The consumer economy is going to transform due to aging. The global production system is going to transform due to all this deglobalization. The movement of all sorts of technology in agriculture and healthcare and finance, all these areas is transforming so many things. This is not an era for a moment for doctrinaire people to just spew party lines when the parties themselves don't know what they think yet. So that's the way I think about it. And this is going to be a long period. So, I mean, I really always say this because people, I think we're looking at years of this, man. Really, Kurt, years of this. This is not going to sort itself out anytime soon. So we have to be building our own knowledge on this stuff.
So you don't have it, because see, for me, I said no one ism works. I don't care if it's capitalism, communism, totalitarianism. Or fascism, whatever. Ism works. And I said, it seems to me that the best isms that you put together, if you put a little bit of socialism and capitalism together and go, look, we take care of those who are the least, and yet still be able to make profit. But capitalism by itself, it's obviously shown that it can't operate by itself because of greedy capitalists that that are willing to trample over everybody for profit, and they'll always put profit before people. So, but then socialism doesn't work all by itself either. And so, my thought was, what if we put a couple of these together and form something different that we haven't seen? And that's why, have you thought about this at any length, like what the future would look like?
Well, I think like a couple of things. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I mean, this is one of the most overused words in the last couple of years has been fascism, where like, I was going to say, obviously fascism's best days are, I meant the only one. So fascism, communism, socialism, all their best days are behind. Capitalism I think there's major transformation coming in capitalism. Capitalism is a bit different because it wasn't like it was an organic development of many things. There's never like a capitalist moment. It's evolved in many different forms over sort of decades. I think that the key is that we need to be closer to the ground. So actually a great point is, I think it was Adam Smith who said that, improvement in capitalist, he didn't even use the word capitalism. So improvement in societies, economic development in societies, economic growth comes from basically on tinkering and ingenuity. Tinkering and ingenuity, which I always loved. Actually, if people haven't read Adam Smith, he was a very interesting guy, and he cared more about moral sentiments, like basically people and emotions and society, than he actually cared about anything called capitalism. So it's very interesting. But this idea of tinkering and ingenuity, we're so wedded to this idea of having a massive, beautiful plan and an idea and a totally integrated ideology that will fix everything. What's going to happen, like regardless of what we want to happen or the idea, what's going to happen is over the next 10 years, people who need to get shit done are going to come together, and they're going to figure out what pieces of what systems of what things we need to do to keep things running, to keep things working, to keep things moving. That's just the way it's going to work. A lot of the massive thinking about cogitating about what it's going to be, what's going to look like, a lot of this is going to be more academic. I mean, you just look at the way the U.S. government functions. It governs by crisis. It only manages to get giant bills passed, like last year with COVID, like all this stuff, when there's a giant crisis. In most political, most administrations get one shot at one bill. They're one signature, and then they're done for the rest of the term, even for another 4 years. So there's just, this isn't where you're gonna. This is not a place to find like massive, well implemented political programs, but it's going to be. You're asking real questions. I think. Yeah. Oh, I was going to say about fascism too. Excuse me. The fascism thing is just a bit of historical context on fascism, because it's used so much. There's a separate thing about whether imperialism, like I really don't, as you can tell with this whole conversation, I haven't gotten drowned into isms, but I want to break apart isms a little bit because people are so wedded to them. So I don't talk about them because I think you could just talk about the way things are, or what you see, what you observe. It could be more relatable, more understandable, and make more sense. But these isms are so huge in people's brains that just to break it up, like fascism is a very specific thing. It really grew up in Southern Europe. It was a function of countries that struggled to industrialize is one case. So that was like Italy and basically Southern Europe, Italy and Spain, which were, as we all know now, since for the last 15 years, they've been the weakest parts of Europe. They have very poor economies. They've never fully integrated together as countries. They're dry and mountainous and not modern in a lot of ways. They turned to to fascism to create this sort of integrated political unit capable of unifying the country, bringing pride, dignity, strength, etc. And obviously has all the problems and terrible association things that come from fascism. And then it came from Germany. The German fascism was different. I mean, this was a fascism rooted in what we talked about earlier, which is the military insecurity of Germany, right? Germany is basically open on all, it's basically a giant field open from every direction. Yeah. And anyone can just roll in. Okay, that's Germany. There's no borders or anything. There's a giant mountain range in the middle that prevents Germany from even, uniting around itself. You need, the Führer, you need the Kaiser to, orient this state together, right? This is something, fascism is something that emerges, at least 20th century fascism, something that was wedded to, more specific political circumstances. There's weird versions of things in all sorts of other countries. Like Argentina had its own bizarre quasi-fascist, communist, weird Peronist thing. There's all sorts of weird stuff, but the European experience, it was very rooted in a specific time. And you can even say the same thing about communism, because a lot of these things, like when I said that, 20th century, 19th century ideas for communism case aren't going to help us, it's really true. Just for example, the idea of communism is basically that there'll be a giant proletarian revolution. Basically, all the urban factory workers were going to rise up, create a new state, end the capitalist exploitation. It was going to get too much. Exploitation would reach a point where everyone was just fed up, and they took it over and created a utopia. Basically, simple story. The problem is that capitalism transformed so much since Marx was writing in the mid 19th century that the biggest thing was just the development of the consumer economy. In the 1920s, roughly, people moved out of satanic mills and they started moving into suburbs. They started the entire capitalist production system. Instead of making weird, industrial goods, they started to make consumer goods. They started to make everything humans desired, right? This is a very big shift that basically most strains of communism and Marxism never really address. So also the reason I'm going over this, I actually have a big podcast episode that I'm doing, and it's going to explain what does Marxism mean in China? What does communism mean in a place like China? No one understands what is a communist state with tens of billionaires and hundreds of billionaires throughout the country, and then tens of billionaires in the government itself. What does that even mean? How is that possible? Why is it hypocritical, or is this too much? So I know a bit about it. It's a bit on my mind. And this the shift to the consumer economy, this was a total blow to this grand edifice of communism. But there's no way to, the same way that political leaders in the United States are never punished if they start a war and they're gone 20 years later and they're just off on their farm and right, they got elected out, but you never get anyone punished for the quote bad, the bad decision of going to Afghanistan or never leaving or whatever it is. It's something similar when some dude who's long dead makes a political system or a theory and it becomes a whole institution, and then it's never adaptive or responsive. Like, we need, one of the great innovations of America in sort of the mental realm was just the idea of pragmatism as a philosophy. It was totally American. It's the only American philosophy. And it basically says, let's try and do things that work. And if it works, we should stick with it because we don't have anything better in a lot of ways. And I don't want to say there's no deeper truths. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say there's no idealistic systems, but most of the attempts at creating large mass implemented idealistic programs is not the most successful, to say the least. Even a place like China, which people often bring up as an example of what can be done if the government does, I think that's a very different situation. That is a situation of China given the resources and the time and the labor and the knowledge to implement what other countries did and basically play catch-up growth, build all the things that all the other countries had, build the power lines, build the roads, build the bridges, build the factories, build all this, and you know exactly what you need to do. It's actually when it had to do its own thing, like we were saying earlier, that all the problems you mentioned come up, where it doesn't know what to, it needs to just, instead it just focuses on controlling its population instead of developing something brand new. But these grand theories they end up very dangerous if they're not flexible or adaptive. So that's something you asked if I kind of thought about it. I think that the most likely situation is just muddle through it for a while, and then you're going to have, do what works when the crisis hits, unfortunately, to varying degrees of success. And then, depending on how strong a sort of charismatic leader, charismatic group you can get, implement it more into sort of broader programs and start pumping out, words and theories that go along with it. But it's not going to start as a theory for sure. There's going to be too many rapid fire sort of crises, situations that are coming for it. Kind of like COVID, we're already kind of ready for this. It's like, boom, what's the great theory about how to do? No, you just start trying to prevent total chaos. That's kind of the way things are going to go. And then the last thing I'd say on that is just that the real thinking is also going to be, the first step is to break up these isms, right? They're not going to help us. They're not. Think about them. You think about outcomes you want. Think about whatever, but the isms aren't going to help us. They've been around a very long time and they have not succeeded. We're going to do it, and you break apart the isms, pull yourself, stop being wedded to the political party or political divide. Even the left-right divide. This only comes from the French Revolution. comes from whether people were on the left side or the right side of the assembly or whatever, when they were, announcing what was going to happen, the whole republic and all that. We need more, right? We need more. Like, there are human institutions that are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds or millions of years old, right? There are ways of life, patterns, things that we've done, behaviors that are very, very old. They have their own wisdom, right? We don't want to limit ourselves to, a sort of dual system that developed in Europe over the last couple hundred years, at most 250 years. This isn't going to help us, right? It's tough to break out of this because everything we do is pulled into politics. And this is one of the things I learned more than I ever want to learn studying China, is that you cannot pull everything back into politics. It's going to crush your soul. It is going to crush your soul. We all know that on some level. Like, you will not win. You cannot win. And the focusing on the brutal political minutia of every day is just going to kill your soul. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. And it's not going to move us forward. We all had the moment in the pandemic, we were reading all the news and just feeling like we were going crazy. We don't need that. We just need to think. We need to think and talk about it, find people who you can be open about, and go through it. You don't need to be proven, showing your membership badge to X or Y tribe to say something on a topic. You don't have to keep showing people you have beliefs they also believe to make them comfortable. We need to all start thinking more, giving ourselves the space and giving people the, respect and just the belief that it's worth doing. Like, we're all kind of, like we were saying earlier, not only are we looking for information on external servers, on Google, on Facebook, on whatever, we're also exporting our thinking to people who write random blogs, random articles, who give random speeches. And like we're saying, I mean, they're paid by this person, they're paid by that person. There's all this whole network of interests that are coming around. The only way this works is if we do our own thinking and we share it with each other and we improve it over time. That's my thought on it. And
be open-minded. Share it with each other.
Yeah.
Be open-minded to what you hear, because what you think might not be correct. It might be. You might.
Yeah. It's so, I've been so wrong, to get to the place where I am, where I'm relatively on it with China. Even I have been so wrong. It would blow your mind. Like, every opinion that people, this is why I feel empathic about this. Like, for a while, I thought China was going to take over the world. I worried about this. I worried about that. I've had every single opinion along the way, so I'm very humbled by this. It makes me more confident in what I'm saying, but it's the same thing. We don't know everything. Can't know everything. Can't try and act like you know everything. It's just,
I was like you. I was of the same, until I talked to you. I was like, you know what? I'm going to start learning Mandarin. Trying to take.
Yeah, it's common, man. I cut that stuff at the knees pretty quick.
Right. And that's
Mandarin's it is a valuable language to learn, though. It's a unique language. It's beautiful. My Mandarin is really atrophied, though. I was really good in 2014, 2015, but for me to get really good, I have to speak it all the time and I have to be around the characters. But I wasn't going to stay in China, longer and longer. It was just
right
too polluted, honestly, to me, especially I was in the north most of the time.
Oh, well, all right. So let's recap real quick. So China will lag seriously behind the U.S. when it comes to the military, and it's unlikely they will ever catch up. So they're not going to be a military threat. All the other things that you had mentioned, as far as that are key indicators about them becoming a world power, like education, social stability, innovation, their age demographic, all that stuff plays into it, and all of it is not good for China. So it's unlikely that they're going to take over. It's anytime in the near future of becoming the preeminent world power that we are. So would that be a true statement?
Yeah, I'd add some little nuance to it. Let me think about. Excuse me. Yeah, I'd say for the military side, China is developing very advanced weapon systems all across the board. I'm not trying to minimize the threat from the Chinese military. It's very significant and it's very advanced. There's multiple weapon systems they have that are nearly on par, or slightly better than the U.S. ones. And they're doing it across the board, and they have a sufficiently advanced and diversified industrial base, as well as electronics sort of to go along with it, and software to go along with it, that they're doing a lot. Just as an example, Russia, everyone talks about how Russia is this great threat. Russia doesn't even have a functional armed drone, which the U.S. has had since like 1998 or something, 99, to whenever the first Predator came out. or some other one. They've had other secret ones too. China has a whole suite of all sorts of drones, right? And this is just one technology, but there's a lot. In the very key area always, so for people to look at is always the Navy. So just getting back to the U.S. military, the U.S. things are slightly changing due to air and space, but the U.S. is a Navy first military. That's the way this works, because we're a giant island surrounded by water. We have to you have to take to sea to get anywhere. Now you can sort of airlift things, and we did that, but when push comes to shove, it's very much a maritime country. China is not a maritime country; it never has been, but is developing is massively building up its navy, and it has many ships, particularly something called the Type 55 destroyer, very advanced, very threatening. That being said, it's not so much the military capacity; it's the military capacity relative to its sort of what it needs to do. Right. So you have this military, but you have to first take over Taiwan. You have to probably subjugate Japan. There's all these countries, there's all these situations, and you have to make sure the U.S. isn't just, lobbing missiles at you the entire time. Right. It's the ability to apply this military in a very threatening and sort of decisive manner. That is not going to happen for China. There's a really good book that was called like The Ghost Fleet. I think it was called. It's about a war between China, and it involves space and electronic stuff and all this stuff. But the way to do it, I mean, it's very tough, right? So we sort of went over that. We talked about the countries around China, the bad histories and all that. You can't avoid, this is the thing, like in European history, Europe has never been able to avoid the fact that Great Britain is dangling off the coast and messing everything up for them. The second anything they used to, so the American playbook is very similar, is a much more expanded and more subtle version of the British playbook in a lot of ways. The former imperial British playbook, although it's different in other respects. But basically, for this balance of power thing we were talking about, Europe, whenever there was a major power that was trying to take over Europe, whether it was the Kaiser, whether it was Napoleon, whether it was whether it doesn't matter who it was, the British always came in and said, no. We're gonna leave you a chaotic mess, just the way we like you. And that's part of the reason Europe's a chaotic mess. It's the same thing with China. You can't like kick your Great Britain away. It's just there. That's the brutal, unforgiving facts of geography are just there, and they're there for China too. Taiwan can't avoid it. Japan can't avoid it. Vietnam can't avoid it. The whole South China Sea and the very limited resource access and the supply lines that you have to protect, but you have no control over. You have to secure, but you have no control over. You can't get around any of this. So that's the real question. There's major military capacity, although I actually do question the sort of, the Chinese military hasn't fought a war since the 1970s, right, and it hasn't done any of the modern military operations that the U.S. has been doing for decades. It's a very political, it's a very corrupt organization in a lot of ways, the PLA. So it has basic integrity issues that the United States military, which is independent, civilian, non-conscript, professional, all that is, they're different beasts in a lot of ways. So that's a separate thing. But yeah, it's the question of capacity to sort of needs, right? Strategic demands and the constraints around them. That's the mean picture for China to try and like do that. And also, what does it mean to really challenge the United States, right? Because that's far away, right? You have to deal with all these other local guys, right? When do you get to attacking San Diego? Do you know what I mean? Like it's a tough one. And then as for the other stuff, you're talking about like all these other cultural stuff and the demographic stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's not even about becoming the preeminent power. China needs to get through this decade in one piece.
Right.
That's its real goal. One piece. We had a couple weeks ago, I'm going to do a quick live stream on the power. So we talked about energy a bit, that there's a massive power crisis in China. We talked about it briefly. I gave some of the reasons why. That's like on top of a property crisis that started a couple of weeks ago, right? And so you're starting to see many of these things start to cascade. And the way it works in Chinese history is it's basically the horsemen of the apocalypse, right? You just have this cascade of problems. It just snowballs. It starts in something. Maybe it starts with a flood. Maybe it starts with a plague. Maybe it starts with an invasion. And in the modern world, maybe it starts with a drop in housing prices. Maybe it starts with a weird supply crunch. Maybe it starts with an energy shortage. Maybe it starts with, it could be any number of things. But what happens is it cascades up. You start to have liquidity problems, you start to have labor problems, you start to have layoffs, it can just spiral totally out of control. So that's kind of what China is really avoiding. And that's kind of like why people ask me, well, what's going to do it, dude? And I'm like, a lot of things could do it. A lot of things could do it. I'm not trying to be cagey here. It's like, really, it is. I mean, I will say the property sector, if people want to, really think about one, that is a bad one. Like, just like the U.S. got hit with subprime, property is where a lot of people put money when they don't know what else to do with it. And they want a sense of security. And in China, it's basically the only option for majority of people. So there's most Chinese wealth is stored in highly inflated property values. When they go down, the wealth of the country just is going to get cut. It could be seriously cut.
I may, if you're game, I may have you back on later on, because there's so much more I want to talk. Like, how does a Jack Ma come about in under this system? Like how do you have, someone like him, who's a billionaire in the system that you wouldn't think would lend itself to that, and
yeah, well, we could do that. I will say I'm doing this podcast. It's going to be so I have a podcast just called China Unraveled. Yeah. And I've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I only bring this up because it just, I'm doing an episode kind of about that. Cause this is one thing I get in interviews all the time. It's like, Jason, how is it communist? What does that even mean? How do you have, you know what I mean? Right. So I'm trying to answer that question in that podcast. And it looks like it's gonna be long. It's gonna be a long one. It's gonna be maybe an hour long or something, but that's your answer. But yeah, I think we could do another one for sure. The thing about China is you can go on forever.
Right.
But
on for over 2.5 hours and I still have questions. So
yeah. So yeah, maybe we could do that. We could set up to give a full another one, but whatever.
Yeah, I would seriously, I'd like that. I definitely would like that. Tell everybody how they can find you. Tell them about your podcast. It's called China Unraveled.
Yeah. So podcast is China Unraveled. Find it wherever you like your podcast. And it's cool. That's definitely a cool one. I've been working on one, like I was saying, I'm working on this episode that got really large because I was trying to put a lot into about China to make it easy for people. So that'll be cool. You can also check out the YouTube channel I have. I basically just, at the moment, I have I'm going to do more videos, something that's interesting about China. Basically, whenever you're talking about a country, it's much easier if you have images. Like if we've been talking and we had images up, it actually helps a lot of people. So videos are really good. And when certain things are aligned, I'm going to be putting more of that out. But right now I do a lot of live streams on there. I just talk about sort of more free flowing things about major issues and stuff going on. So that's where I talk about the property sector in China. I'm going to talk about the energy thing there. I talk about all sorts of random stuff. So the video games, they called it electronic opium, China attacking like sissy men. Like they're trying to go on a crusade against effeminate men for various reasons. There's all sorts of stuff. So check that out. So the YouTube channel, you can just find me. It's Jason Szeftel. And podcast anywhere you got it. I have a website, also www.jasonszeftel. There's some selected writings. I'm trying to put more of it up there, but I have also articles and stuff I've written that I think I mentioned a article about China and India, which might be up, but there's stuff about Chinese agriculture, all whole systems in China, stuff like that. I'm also working. So this information isn't just coming out of my butt. It's coming primarily from a book that I've been working on for a few years. That's sort of a comprehensive look at China, and the goal is for that to be published a few months from now. So you can get updates or something on my website as well. You can sign up for that. And what else do I do? Oh, Twitter. Yeah. So I don't actually use Twitter much, but it's a good place to reach me. You can see me there. And that's most of it. For people who are interested, another thing that's been cooking for a while, although it's a bit on the back burner, is just I'm going to do a course and make a course to try and explain some of the why countries are the way they are. So we got into that a bit, kind of multiple times in this episode, just about, Italy and why they get fascism, why Germany get fascism, why the United States have a chaotic political system and economic dynamism, yet seem relatively secure nationally. Why does China have this? Why does China have that? I think a lot of these questions we don't quite understand this stuff because we're kind of a hole in our education, or learning was kind of put there. We don't quite get how peoples relate to the land and to things like that. And it's very important kind of as things start to break down more, understanding this is going to be crucial. So I've been kicking around making a course that's going to sort of explain some of this stuff. So you could also probably sign up for that, just to get on the email list somewhere at my website.
I think that's a great idea. I'd love to, and I think that's something when your book comes out or when your course comes out, let's have you on. Let's because I think there's a lot of interest out there. People would be interested in the nuances of all this and not just, basic, fact, details that are not even details, just basic knowledge that we're given that doesn't really tell us anything of how these things work and why they work the way they do. So I think your course in particular would be an interest to many people.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that. I think, the goal behind all this was to use China as a test case to kind of use the stuff I'm talking about in the course. I have a long interest and deep interest in China, but it's applying these ideas to a country because the real reason is just to understand our own country a bit more and to better see where it's going and why and where it is and why it is the way it is. I think a lot of political questions and problems come because we also don't understand a lot of this stuff in the U.S. So that's good to hear. And I think that ultimately this idea of, this course is various forms of it. If I do more, it's kind of a way to spatially orient people in the world, right? These same things explain, well, why am I in this city? Why is this city here? Why is this city? Why is Los Angeles where it is? Why does it exist? Why is it so big? Why is there a port here? Why is this here? We don't actually understand a single thing about why the world is laid out the way it is. And it's not a knock on anybody. It's just, we're not told it. And even the basic stuff, like when we were in elementary school, we're told like, oh, let's learn the capitals of all these states. And it's always weird. I remember looking back, like, why do I have to learn the capital of why are all the capitals of states like stupid little cities that no one's heard of? And you never have to know again. So I remember thinking like Washington State's capital is Olympia. No one knows that. That's fine. I didn't think to know that. But I remember thinking like, why are these stupid old people, stupid humans make a city in a bad place, like a small city? Why don't you make it the big city? And the truth is we just don't remember. We don't know how to look at the map. We don't know how to see why they put the cities where they did. People were not dumb. They're all there for a reason. And we just don't know how to see it anymore. So that's some of what I'm trying to do once current crop of stuff gets done.
One who's a fan of history, I'm looking forward to that course. I think that'd be great, seriously a great course. And I know there's a lot of history fans out there that would really be interested in that. So before I go, I have to ask you this last question because you brought it up and I had a listener ask me to ask you about this and I almost forgot. Thank goodness you brought it up. What is the deal with China and effeminate men? What he wanted to know, like, why do they have this thing out against effeminate men?
Yeah, there's kind of a couple of things going on in this. I mean, so one minor thing is just that there's a male sort of physique sort of ideal in East Asia that is what we'd sort of see already as more feminine. So this is sort of, you could think of the South Korean boy band sort of look, K-pop. Right? Which is very popular in the K-pop look, very popular in Asia, and actually very occasionally despised by the Communist Party for all of its influence in China, which is actually a small part of this. They really don't like how much this seems like Korean influences. But the other thing is there is a major, how do I say this? So in China, there's something that's often been called Han chauvinism, right? So how do I say this? Like one way to think about it is that there is what I call the imperial impulse in China is often it's very related to, you could say, like a masculine impulse, right? So in Chinese history, there's no pope, okay? There's no pope. There's no spiritual major figure. The emperor was the spiritual core and the main spiritual figure in the country and the main political figure. And he was also sort of he's a godlike male as well. These were all combined. And so one thing I often say is that there's an emperor-sized hole in China. So and this is a real thing. So in Japan, after World War II, the United States, MacArthur basically, who was a governor occupier of Japan after the war, they had to decide, do we keep the emperor or do we just get rid of him? And they wisely decided, you keep the emperor. This is a symbolic person. The United States, we don't have these sort of symbolic things in the same way. So we have like just dissolute, ridiculous celebrities that we treat like gods, but it's just like a burlesque of all these ridiculous, useless celebrities doing nonsense, right? In other countries, they have more of a symbolic function for heads of state. And, you have the queens and you have this and you have that, and you have the emperors in East Asia, and well, at least in Japan and in China. There's a major problem in China right now, and ever since Mao, like what exactly they need a sort of cult of personality. They need a major head honcho to circle things around. This is a country that you need this. I mean, this is basically like the warlord, right? You need to glorify, deify the warlord in a lot of ways. This is literally how, this is actually Chinese history. There's warlords were deified into emperors, into gods. This is kind of how things went. And there's a lot of fear in China about this question of femininity, of masculinity, of what's going on, of Chinese boys being fat, of people being weak, you can kind of think about it like, well, if they see all these crises coming for the country, they're very worried about people sitting around and looking at gossip magazines and reading celebrity stories and then sort of, seeming effeminate. And I know this seems very minor to people, but one of the very interesting things about China is that often what we're seeing in China, especially in the last 5 years, is the Chinese government is responding loudly and often ridiculously to problems that are seen in various forms all around the world, right? So everyone knows that people are probably playing a bit too much video games, right? But no country goes and says it calls it electronic opium, which in China is associated with national weakness due to and effeminacy and defeat in the 19th century opium wars. They don't call it electronic opium and then like ban it in all these crazy ways and limit all the access and all this stuff. They don't sort of do it that way, but everyone knows it's sort of a problem. And I think there's a similar thing where you can go all across the internet, all across YouTube, and you find people complaining about a crisis of masculinity and the what to do about feminism and what to do about this. This has been a sort of basic question since the 1960s. It's kind of like, how do you integrate the sexes in this sort of new world with different roles and different opportunities? And this has been a sort of a common thing. But again, in China, it's different. Like, so the same way that in Japan, feminism, or I wouldn't say feminism, like sort of the improvement of the rights and opportunities to women is sort of different, right? There's stronger cultural prohibitions. There's all these sorts of things. In China, there's also a difference, right? Like pretty sure it's still every single member. Like if you go look at the parliament or what, not the parliament, basically the fake legislative body in China, it's basically all sort of men in suits with the same sort of slick black hair. There's very much a patriarchal sort of not patriarchal in the sense of like there's a historical oppression of all these people over time. It's more that there's been very much a male-run country. It's associated again with basically warlords ran this country. They sort of, the people who conquered China were warlords, and that's sort of the cycle that happened over and over again. This question of like effeminacy, it gets to the core of whether China can sustain itself as a country. I know that sounds insane, like just totally insane, but if the way you keep things together is by having a warlord and his posse keep everything together through force, there's two options actually. I mean, I've actually said this on another podcast, but there's kind of two options. You could actually go either the Brave New World route, or you could go the Big Brother route. I mean, sort of the 1984 route, right? So 1984 is like, let's throw in the surveillance systems. Let's control everybody. Let's have a strong military, right? Let's get ready for war. Let's do all this. The Brave New World idea is actually kind of different. Let's give everybody drugs. Let's let them play video games. Let's let them be as effeminate as possible, because then they're easy to control. They're easy to defeat in war. They're easy to defeat if they try and rebel, whatever. China is, honestly, I think they kind of go back and forth between these two things, but the fear of weakness is a real thing in China, and it's coming out in all sorts of bizarre ways. The effeminacy thing, there's a strong sense of social degradation in China. I mean, I think you see this. There's been conservative arguments about this, for example, in the United States since the 60s onwards, of like, oh my God, the role and expectations and appearance and demeanor and attitude of men and women is transforming, right? There's this question of how to deal with it is with us, but like we were describing earlier, there's more give in the US system, right? We can have a chaos, like I said, you can have the super capitalist cutthroat economy and things don't do okay. You can have this brutal politics, which is really divisive, and things aren't turning into bloody civil war. You can also have a really kind of disruptive sexual politics in a lot of ways, and things don't turn to total shit, at least for a while. I mean, you kind of have to have continue having babies at least to keep the the, I don't know, the sex war is going. But in China, it's a bit different. I mean, there's also a real challenge of the sex ratio in China. So people may not know, but sex ratio is a major factor on mating behavior in human and all animals and mammals, and including humans. So people, men and women, change their behavior based on how many people around them. And it's another major thing that produces instability in China. So it's basically a population the size of California of men in China who are not going to be able to find wives, right? Because there's just, the numbers don't work out. There's that many more men than women because of basically, unfortunately, female infanticide in China. It's associated with just cultural stuff and the belief basically that women won't be able to care for their parents and they'll be with their husbands and all this stuff. So there's a huge problem with the sex ratio, and China has no idea how to deal with this. Like all the stuff around sex, not in terms of like the physical recreation of sex and the procreation of sex, but like the sexes and how they relate to each other. So we shouldn't pretend like this is a major question for economies all around the world. South Korea has the lowest, which also, again, this is the K-pop feminacy place in China's mind. This place has the lowest fertility rate of any country on earth. And it is basically kind of the Korean population is disappearing as a result of this over time. Slowly, that's where this leads. So these questions are very far in the forefront of countries' minds, especially ones that really control their population. So in Chinese history, the government, whenever they roll into power, they actually they do population control things. So they either boost the pop. Often what they do is they take over. A bunch of the people died during the wars to unify the country, and then they actually basically have a government-sponsored reproduction program, right? Like a fertility program. Like Mao did this actually after 1950s. There's like a breed for the motherland program. He thought the U.S. would nuke everything in the country, so he wanted as many Chinese people as possible. So the Chinese birth rate went up. And then it's the same thing. So then China also did. So that's the flip side, where we know about the one-child policy, but there was actually earlier on, there was a many-child policy under Mao for a while. So this is just a general imperial Chinese behavior. And in the modern world, though, it's much more complex, right? Because we have you can't force women to do things the way you could before. You can't, it's also very hard to force women to have children. Like no country has succeeded in, basically no large advanced developed country has succeeded in raising their birth rate, once it's fallen below the replacement rate, the fertility rate. So it's just a very knotty problem. And China is so used to controlling every aspect of the country that this is one of the areas where it's most out of whack, where it's most confused, where it's most desperate to fix things. Because it knows, like you said earlier, if you get old before you get rich, there is nothing you can do about it. Right. And so a lot of it is they can't deal with the major issues. So they're dealing with these other ones. But yeah, a lot of those things. So there's the masculine element, the sort of warlord history. I know this sounds like I brought in a lot of stuff, but it's a much wider picture. The masculine element of imperial systems. What else did I say? Masculine element, imperial system, the warlord, the deified warlord thing, the basic interplay of the sexes post 1960s, post contraception. So in China, it came later. There wasn't contraception till more recently. And yeah, all of this is just creating a major sort of crisis there. And again, I'm not actually trying to say there's a crisis of effeminacy. I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think it's more, it's a part of this broader problem of how do you get the sexes to interrelate in a way that is interdependent, maybe mutually supportive, that is not repressive to either side, that is sort of equally agreed upon. All of these questions we don't have good answers to. And the truth is that the sort of feminist, even masculinist, there's kind of both of these now, like especially Korea, there's like two camps. There's like a feminist camp and a masculinist camp, and they're just like eyeing each other on the other side of the room, and they're refusing to interact with each other. And meanwhile, the new humans aren't being made, right? And so the country's kind of disappearing. So I think everyone's kind of worried. A lot of governments are worried about things like this because a lot of countries like Eastern Europe, they're disappearing.
I must be something though, because when I see these K-pop guys, they have all these female fans. So obviously there's women out there who are attracted to them. And so I don't know why there's not this, getting together, if you will, of these effeminate guys and women, because again, there's at least certain portion of the population.
It's more a symbol. Like the effeminacy thing is more a symbol to the government. It's not that they don't actually can't get girls in a way. It's more that they're a symbol of the decline of, the Han, the proud Han race in a way, right? So they used to say, I mentioned earlier, I didn't go into it, but Han chauvinism was basically this term that used to capture the idea that there was a strong sort of patriarchal imperial combo that went on for China for hundreds of years. And it's true in a lot of senses. And I think that the Chinese Communist Party is very worried that they've lost something essential in the, the capability, the sort of masculine essence of the nation or something. That's kind of what they're looking at. That's kind of what they're seeing, I guess I should say.
Do gay people fall under that category as well? Are they considered effeminate or less than?
Yeah, there's not gay. I'm pretty sure gay marriage isn't fully legal in China, and gay relationships are not the norm as you sort of see. And I'm actually not an expert on this, but it's definitely not fully legal, the gay rights, and it's not as overt in the same way. Although
I do notice that, like on YouTube, you'll have some Chinese couples that are gay men or whatever, and I do notice that when they're out in public, they tend to be much more careful about public displays of affection. They tend to hide those very much. Now, with China being as like watching over everything, I can't believe they don't see these these videos on YouTube. And my question to you would be, when they notice gay people, or they notice these effeminate guys, and they have this social rating system, is this like a mark against them?
The social credit score thing, that hasn't fully kind of panned out. It's kind of like they're trying to do it. It's a whole thing about, it's not really that. It's more behaviors, right? So if you do the right things, if you jaywalk, you get punished. If you do this, you get better, access to different resources, different goods, to different prices. It's not quite yet this comprehensive like scorecard on your entire behavior. But I mean, realistically, more authoritarian, totalitarian countries don't respond well to gay rights, various individual sexual freedom, sexual minorities. That's not their concern, right? They're not interested in preserving that side of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, listen,
all right.
We have done 3 hours. This is but I'm telling you, like I said, I could go on another 3 hours with you. I won't, but I could. So, it was such a pleasure to have you on, and I am looking forward to having you on again and going more into detail, especially about when your book comes out, and especially when you design this course. I really want to take a look at your course, because I think that'll be amazing. So I'm looking forward to it. And one last thing, would you agree with me, when you're playing Risk, that you should go for the U.S.? Best decision ever is to take care of the U.S. and you'll win. I've never lost a game of Risk, and it's because of that. I've always picked the U.S.
Oh wow, I don't even remember, but sounds like a good idea based on everything I said.
Well, like you said, there's only a couple borders, so you don't have to really, you don't have to worry about all these other countries surrounding you. So it's a good strategy. But anyway, well, listen, thank you very much, and folks, thanks for joining us. Check out Jason on his website, and check out his podcast, China Unraveled. And if you want to learn more, and we'll have him back on again. So anyway, till next time, stay safe, be careful. And for right now, I know some of you hate this, but wear your mask. Bye.